We're at City Hall tonight, and my special guest is my assistant, George Thabault. And this evening, George and I are going to discuss a wide variety of issues that are facing us in city government, and some of the issues that we expect will be on the ballot at March meeting. And we'll also chat a little bit about some of the important issues facing the city in terms of the current discussions taking place in the legislature. George, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Is that all you have to say, George? All right, well, we'll continue.
You can kick it off.
Okay. Today is Friday. Yesterday, George and I were down in the legislature, and in fact, I testified before two committees there on two separate and important issues. One of them dealt with an issue that I think has not gotten the kind of discussion that it needs here in the state of Vermont, and it's beginning to get some discussion throughout the country, and that is the very serious problem which is existing not only in our state but throughout the nation in terms of low voter turnouts in elections. The truth of the matter is that compared to other democracies throughout the industrialized world, the United States of America has one of the lowest turnouts. People basically in large numbers simply do not participate in elections. And if we are going to consider ourselves a democratic society, we've got to ask that very, very hard question: why don't people come out and vote? And I think the reasons are manifold. There are a number of reasons. The deepest reason really has to do with people's attitude toward the major political parties in this country, I think, and to the political leadership. And ultimately, I think by not coming out and voting, people, primarily low-income and working people who very often do not vote, are saying that what the politicians are saying is not really relevant to my life. That it doesn't matter if candidate A wins or if candidate B wins, the wages that I receive are still going to be too low, my rent's going to be too high, my health care benefits are not going to be good enough, etc., etc. That the political system is not really talking to people who need help, and the people are saying, really, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to waste 5 minutes to come out and vote. I think that's the ultimate problem. That problem is not going to be solved by the Vermont State Legislature, but what can be solved is, it seems to me, to try to do away with many of the obstacles that presently exist that make it hard for people to register and come out and vote. And in that area, we are doing poorly as a state and poorly as a nation. Throughout much of the industrialized world, governments are saying that we, the government, will register you to vote, we want you to vote, and in some instances in Europe, we're going to fine you, actually fine you, if you don't vote. The legislature is now dealing with a bill called H319, is it? Yeah. That is now being heard before the House Municipal Corporations Committee, which I think would do something. It's not a magic cure, but would have an impact in increasing voter turnout. And that is it's called the same day as election registration process. And what that means is right now, let's say you're an average citizen, okay, and you're not particularly interested in politics and you're bored and you don't want to vote. Well, 2 days before the election, in the midst of all the excitement, it finally dawned on you that you would like to vote for candidate X to become president of the United States. And you wake up, and you walk into the town clerk's office and say, here I am, this is my name, I want to vote. And the town clerk will tell you, I'm sorry, the election is in 2 days, you can't register to vote because registration has closed 3 weeks ago. What same day as election registration would do is allow people to register to vote on the exact same day as the election. They come in, they say, here's my valid ID, I am John Jones, I want to vote, here's my address, let me fill out the form, fine, you filled out, and you're registered to vote. That process now works in 4 states in the Union. It works in Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Maine. And Maine has had it, in fact, since 1973. And that is the bill that is now being discussed before the House Municipal Corporations Committee. I testified for it because I think it would allow a significant number of people to be able to register to vote who now can't, and get them to the polls to vote. A number of town clerks voted against it. They thought that they're already overwhelmed with work. This would simply add more work to them, and they didn't want to have to deal with that. I think that those problems can be solved.
I think Bernie can also mention that some of the other parts of proposals to get people to vote more in greater numbers, for example, keeping the polls open this November till 9 p.m. rather than closing at 7 p.m. It's been proposed on the federal level that might be a way to prevent the California voters, the West Coast voters, from knowing how the results are in the East. But it also would enable a lot of people who work long hours to get to the polls and register and vote.
Exactly right. And I think that same-day registration will have an impact, but I think we've got to go a lot further than that. And as George indicates, the issue of even the hours of polling are a very important issue. I was stunned, actually, I found out last year when I ran for governor, that there are some polling places in the state that do not open until 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay? So you have a person, let's say you have a working person who has to drive an hour to get to work. Well, they're not going to be able to vote in the morning. They come home from work 6:30, perhaps 7 o'clock. They need dinner. It's too late. The polls are closed. It seems to me to be proper that we open the polling places early in the morning so people can get there before they go to work. You keep them open late at night so when people come home from work, they can vote. So I think the idea of extending polling hours to 9 o'clock, which is now, as you indicate, being discussed nationally, should in fact be moved forward here in the state of Vermont. Two other areas that I think the state can take action on which would increase voter turnout is the concept of postcard registration. About half the states in the union now have postcard registration, which simply means that if you want to register to vote, instead of having to go into a city clerk's office, instead of having to find a notary public, you fill out a form, fill out a postcard, you mail it in, you get your form sent back to you. And the last issue would be an aggressive role on the part of state government and city governments to begin to go out all over the state and just make contact with people through a variety of ways, saying it is important that you register to vote. This is an issue, I repeat, that I think has not gotten the kind of discussion that it needs. But clearly, there's something very, very wrong in our society, which prides itself on being a democratic society when large numbers of people don't vote. They don't vote in federal elections, they vote even less in state elections, and they vote much less in local elections. We've got to find out why that is, and it seems to me government has got to do everything in its power to take steps to make it easier for people to register. Do you have any other thoughts you want to answer that one?
No, but I think as long as we're speaking about voting, we could mention that I think during this election here locally and then for town meeting that the deadlines will still be the same. It's going to be 17 days before March 1st. That's to be the last day to register to vote in Burlington. So people should be aware if they're not registered or if they've changed their address in the last year to stop in at City Hall or call and somebody can arrange to get a visit to you to get registered and get your name properly on the checklist.
Okay. The second issue that we dealt with yesterday in Montpelier dealt with a bill that's being proposed which would mandate that for the first time the state of Vermont pay property taxes, or in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of taxes, on property that it owns to the cities and towns. What you now have is, in my view, and I think the view of most mayors and city officials around the state, is the very absurd situation that you have state buildings which require police protection, they require fire protection, they require snow plowing, they require all the services that a city provides, except they don't have to pay property taxes. The state, in its own generosity, has said that state buildings don't have to pay property taxes. That's very nice of the state to do. And it seems to me wrong. It seems to me simply nothing more than the state saying, we have the power to determine who's tax exempt, and we're determining that we're tax exempt. That's very nice of them. But what it really means then is that the property taxpayers in the city, homeowners and others, business community, are basically subsidizing a state government and are paying for the services that the state buildings receive. This becomes especially ironic and especially absurd when we're looking at a state surplus of some $50 million, and many communities around the state simply don't have a whole lot of money to be subsidizing the state government. Connecticut is leading the nation in intelligent plans on this, and they're doing two things. Number one, they are providing payments in lieu of taxes not only for state buildings, which they do, but they're also providing payments in lieu of taxes for universities and for hospitals. Okay, to the tune, they don't pay 100% of what the hospitals or universities or state buildings would pay, but they pay what amounts to a reasonably significant amount of money. And for communities in Connecticut, it results in substantial amount of revenue. I think we were saying Hartford, Connecticut, their state capital receives something like $9 million. For Burlington, a program like that would be very, very sensible because, of course, it would mean money from payments in lieu of taxes for UVM and the medical center, as well as for the many office buildings, state office buildings here in Burlington. So I testified strongly in support of that bill. I'm not sure if it will pass or not, but I think momentum is with the concept, and I think it has a reasonable shot to pass. So that's what happened in Montpelier yesterday. Let me, at this point, swing to March meeting here in Burlington and to tell you some of the tentative suggestions that are being made that have come out of my administration and out of other sources for ballot items, items that will be on the ballot in March that people will be asked to vote for. In terms of tax increases, what we as a city, and we're not the school board, but what we as a city are looking for now is revenue for capital improvements, not revenue at all for general operating expenses. Inflation is not that high, and we think that we don't need any more money from taxpayers this year for general operating, for the general operating budget. There are several areas, however, that we do think we need some help with. Our fire department, I think, has been known for a number of years, has equipment which is not in the best of shape. And my hope and expectation is that we're going to have a question on the ballot which will go a very, very long way toward replacing most of the major vehicles, the major fire trucks now being used by the fire department, replacing them with essentially new vehicles and putting us in a position where we're not going to have to spend significant amounts of money improving and repairing these vehicles, which have a tendency to get broken down a whole lot. So essentially, one of the important items that will probably be on the ballot, if I have anything to say about it, will be a major replacement of vehicles for the Burlington Fire Department. There is another issue that will probably be on the ballot that I will be supporting, and that is the need to develop revenue to improve our unaccepted streets and, in fact, begin to accept them. Without going through a whole discussion now as to why certain streets are quote-unquote unaccepted, what essentially happened is when they were built years and years ago, they were built by private developers, they didn't meet specifications, they haven't been maintained well, the city has not been prepared to take over maintenance of those streets. What we have to do now is put money into improving those streets. There's streets all over the city. My memory is correct, I think we're talking about 40 or 50 different streets. We'll need additional money to deal with that, and we'll make it part of the whole street repaving program, which is going well. And that will cost approximately about $700,000, a one-shot $700,000 investment. And thirdly, in terms of capital improvements, there are a number of smaller areas. Every single year, just as with anybody's automobile or anybody's home, things get run down a little bit. And there are a number of smaller projects that have to be tended to, and we'll need some money for that. I don't think we're talking about very significant sums of money. We don't have the exact figures yet. More discussion has got to go on in the Board of Finance and the Board of Aldermen. But that looks to me like the money items that will be asked for the people of the city. Another item that's going to be on, in all probability, will be a charter change that will request the legislature to give the city of Burlington authority to start a child care development fund. We have talked about child care previously on this program. In my view, the situation regarding child care throughout the nation, throughout the state, and in our region is in crisis situation. Some of the larger and better child care centers are in poor shape. They're losing their staff because the pay scale is very, very low. Some of them have capital needs problems. We've got to deal with it. Governor Cunin yesterday announced her budget. She has some money in there for child care, but frankly, a very small sum of money. It will hardly dent the surface of the needs that are out there. Several months ago, I appointed a task force on child care to study the problem. We will be meeting again next week in what I hope will be the final meeting, and I hope that we will have a ballot item on for March meeting, which would allow the city in one form or another to establish a tax assessment district through which all non-residential, that's non-homeowners, would be paying into. It would not be, in terms of tax increases, a very significant amount of money for the commercial and industrial and tax-exempt institutions, but it would enable us to begin to have some money to upgrade the child care situation in the city. George, any thoughts on that? Or?
No,
Okay.
I think you covered that pretty well.
Next item that we're looking at is a non-binding referendum, which essentially means it's the results are not going to be translated into law. It's more of an opinion survey. How do people feel about the issue? And it's an issue that has begun to generate discussion around the state, and it's being sponsored by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And it's the concept of home rule, which is also an issue that I've talked about on this program before. Essentially, the state of Vermont has granted very, very little autonomy, very little self-rule to local government, whether it's Burlington or Brattleboro or Bennington. Essentially, we do not have the authority, no matter what the people of Burlington want or what the people of Brattleboro want, to implement programs that make sense to ourselves. We are dependent upon the property tax, so it is very hard for us to develop new alternatives to the property tax. Burlington has done that. We have led the state in that, but we've had to crawl and scratch and fight like crazy against the legislature to make any progress at all. Throughout the country, there are a number of states that have said to their local communities, okay, everything being equal, you have the power to make decisions within your jurisdiction. If it is constitutional, if it does not impinge upon state law. Okay, go for it. That's what democratic society is about. Vermont has not done that. They have given local government very little authority. This home rule constitutional amendment would say to the Vermont state legislature, put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to give local government a degree of self-rule. Don't force them to do everything the way you in Montpelier want them to do it. That's essentially what it's about. I expect that this ballot item will be voted upon by cities and towns throughout the state. The next item is also a non-binding item, and that deals with a referendum which would urge the United States Congress and the Vermont delegation to the Congress, our 3 congressional people, to enact a national health care program. And George has done a lot of work on that. As I think some of you know, a number of months ago, we brought together a task force on health care to deal with what, in my view, might be the most serious domestic crisis that we have, and that is the issue of affordable health care for our people. The cost of health care is going up very, very rapidly. Many people have no health insurance whatsoever. How do we deal with that problem? We put together a task force that has done a whole lot of work. George, do you want to say a few words about that?
I think the ballot item will probably be worded a little bit similarly to what was on the ballot in 1986 in the state of Massachusetts. And that was a very popular type of movement led by consumers, by healthcare reformers who saw that there were a lot of people in Massachusetts not getting coverage. In fact, there were about almost 600,000 people, adults in Massachusetts, without any health insurance whatsoever. So they put this on the ballot statewide, and it received a 69% plurality of the votes, asking for a national health care program that was cost efficient, that was comprehensive in coverage, that had dental, mental health care, and really covered everybody. And I think what it led to, it gave impetus to people in the Massachusetts legislature to move forward. And what they have now under consideration from Governor Dukakis and healthcare supporters is a bill that will create a new agency to oversee a program that would give those 600,000 people, basic health care coverage at very reasonable cost. It finally could get into a system where if they had an accident, had to go to the hospital for an extended stay, they could afford it, and they would seek care when they needed it. I think that's what we found in our task force, is people felt without the resources behind you, without insurance or a big bank account, people were very reluctant sometimes to seek medical opinions and advice and care when they needed it right up front. And things get worse, and it gets more expensive and very much more difficult for people.
Okay. I think, again, this is a non-binding resolution, and what it will say is to the United States Congress, we would like you, if you vote yes on this, we would like you to do what virtually every industrialized nation in the world is doing, with the exception of South Africa, and that is to move toward a national health care system where health care is considered to be a right of citizenship and not just a privilege. The issue of a national health care system is a complex issue. Honest people disagree as to how it should be forged and exactly what the system should be. There's no question, in my mind at least, that this nation has got to follow Canada and much of Europe in that direction, and that there has got to be a lot more debate on the issue than there presently is. Right now, of course, the medical industrial complex, the people who now run and profit from the healthcare system, they think the present healthcare system is fine. For good reason. They're making a lot of money. They're doing great. Drug companies think it's terrific. Surgeons who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year think it's terrific. The hospitals have no problem with it. They're doing okay. It's only the people who can't afford the outrageous healthcare cost who have a problem. And it's going to be a tremendous fight. It's not going to happen overnight. But essentially, we've got to develop a groundswell. We've got to start at the grassroots level and getting people thinking about the issue. And I think this referendum will be a step in that direction. So that I would like to see. I know the progressives on the Board of Aldermen would like to see this on the agenda. We will see if Republicans and Democrats support it, but that's what we will be proposing.
Let me throw a quick note in here, Bernie, that on this issue of insurance for people in Vermont without any health insurance right now, there's going to be a hearing on January 21st, Thursday evening, in Montpelier at 7 p.m. To discuss the current bills that are being proposed to provide health coverage for people that currently do not have health insurance because they can't afford it or their employers don't offer it and they still can't afford it. So that's going to be a very important hearing, and if anybody does not have health insurance would like to comment, they'd be very welcome to come down to Montpelier, 7 p.m. at the State House on Thursday, January 21st.
Okay, and we certainly hope that you'll be there. It's a very important issue, and I'm glad that in the state of Vermont now that discussion is beginning to take place. Clearly, we have got to make sure that every Vermonter does have insurance of one kind or another. I think that's only a small part of the problem. We've got to go beyond that, but at least it's the beginning of that discussion. Another issue that we're proposing to be on the ballot will be a non-binding referendum urging the Board of Aldermen to adopt ordinances enhancing authority of the city regulatory agencies to assess large development projects. Well, what does that mean in English? The whole issue of growth and development is an issue that is being widely thought about now in the state of Vermont. I think it's about time. And it's a lot trickier than people think it might be. Essentially, right now, if you own a piece of property, you're a developer, you own a piece of property, and you submit plans that's consistent with present zoning, you have the right to build, and that's the simple truth of it, and no one argues that. The city has a right to make certain demands, but essentially, if you're in conformity to zoning, you have the right to build. I think as the state of Vermont and as the city of Burlington and as Chittenden County becomes increasingly developed, people are getting nervous, and they're saying, hey, you know, even if the zoning presently conforms to existing zoning requirements, do we really need this? I mean, what is it really doing for us? How much development do we want? And all over America, that issue is being discussed. I think myself that I'm glad that it's being discussed, and I think ultimately what probably will happen is that throughout Vermont and in our own city, zoning requirements are going to be made more stringent. The criteria, more stronger criteria are going to be established for development, in the sense that the people are going to want to know really what this development is doing for our community. It's going to be an issue, I know, at the very top of our agenda for the coming aldermanic session. This would be a non-binding referendum basically going out to the people and saying, are you satisfied with present zoning? Do you think present zoning gives us the protection, enough protection, or do you want us to go further and be a little bit more stringent? And once we hear from the people on that issue, then the real debate has to begin as to exactly how you go forward. And it's a tricky issue, a lot of legal repercussions. I'm not sure that we're not going to end up in court no matter what we pass, but that's an issue that we wanted to hear views from the people about. Another issue that will be on deals with a conflict of interest charter change. I think dealing with members of the Board of Aldermen, is that?
I believe so, and other city officials.
Right. The feeling there is one wants to make sure that when elected officials especially are voting on an issue, that they're not voting for their own self-interest as opposed for the interest of the people. I don't think that that's a controversial piece. There's another item that will probably be on, which is non-binding, and that's a resolution urging support for programs to prevent sexual assault and violence. As you know, sexual assault is a serious issue, and we're going to try to generate some support from the citizens on that. Okay, so those are some of the items that the Board of Aldermen will be hearing about this Monday night. That was actually yesterday when you're watching this program, and they will be voted up or down the Monday following.
January 18th.
January 18th. And that, am I correct? Are we going to be going live with our Board of Aldermen meetings by that time?
Possibly by that time, yeah.
Okay, one of the very exciting things I think that's happening in terms of this station, cable access, is, as those of you who watch the station know, we now have the Board of Aldermen meetings taped. They're taped on Monday night. They're put on television, I believe, Wednesday night. And we've been doing that for the last year, and Nat and his associates, I think, have been doing an excellent job. We finally have gotten City Hall wired now for live transmission. And Nat is indicating that he thinks perhaps on the 18th, there is a possibility, we're not sure yet, but certainly it's coming soon, where the meetings from the Board of Aldermen will be live from City Hall, right? So, Saturday Night Live, watch out. The Board of Aldermen are on the way. Okay, we have only a few more minutes. George, any profound thoughts?
Well, I think probably that, probably should mention that there might be a couple other issues on the ballot from the school department, which is a separate legal entity, but it looks like a list of about 9 to 11 items, and so I think different groups will probably be getting out literature around the neighborhoods and door to door about all the items, and the city clerk usually prints a ballot with the language on each, so people can read that in line. So it looks like a pretty interesting.
Right. Now, these are, by the way, suggestions that are coming from the suggestions that we went over this evening are suggestions that came from my administration and from the Board of Finance, which doesn't mean to say that somebody else may not walk in on Monday night or the following Monday night and also have proposals. So this is not yet definitive. It may change, and some of these ideas that we're proposing may be rejected by the board. Okay, I think we have covered some of what's going on in the city, and we thank you very much for viewing. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week.
I'd just like to start by introducing the folks here at the table.